My name is Darlene, and I'm 63 years old. I thought today would be the happiest day of my daughter's life. The soft light of dawn spilled through my bedroom curtains, the kind of golden glow that makes everything look gentler, calmer, almost sacred. I woke up before my alarm, heart fluttering with anticipation. Today wasn't just any day. Today was my daughter Claire's wedding day, and I had been waiting for this moment for so long. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I whispered a little prayer, thanking God for giving her another chance at happiness after everything she had been through. Claire, my only child, was finally remarrying. After years of tears, of trying to rebuild her confidence and trust in people, she had found someone who made her smile again. His name was Daniel, a man who seemed to have appeared from nowhere but somehow fit perfectly into our lives. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who pulled out chairs and remembered birthdays. I'd never seen Claire laugh the way she did when she was with him. She looked alive again. I could still remember the night she told me he'd proposed. She'd come running into my house, breathless and beaming, a ring glittering on her finger. For the first time in years, she'd looked like the bright young woman I raised, hopeful, radiant, full of dreams again. I remember hugging her tightly and whispering that she deserved every ounce of joy coming her way. And now, here we were, her wedding day. I walked into the kitchen, still wearing my robe, and found my granddaughter Lily sitting at the table with a mug of cocoa. She was only 14 but wise beyond her years. She looked up at me with a sleepy smile. "Morning, Grandma," she said softly. I smiled back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You ready for the big day, sweetheart?" She nodded, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Maybe nerves. Maybe just the usual teenage reluctance toward large family events. I didn't think much of it. I was too busy thinking about Claire. The house was already alive with movement. The caterers had arrived early to start setting up the tables in the backyard garden. The scent of fresh roses filled the air as decorators adjusted ribbons and lanterns. The theme was soft blush and cream, a color palette Claire had chosen because, as she said, it felt like peace. I walked outside, admiring the transformation. The old oak tree was draped with twinkling fairy lights, and the archway where they'd say their vows was covered in cascading white roses. It was breathtaking. I turned when I heard Claire's laughter behind me. She was standing in her robe, her hair pinned up in rollers, surrounded by her bridesmaids. She looked absolutely beautiful, even before she put on her gown. "Mom!" she called, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Can you believe this is actually happening?" I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. "I can, sweetheart. You deserve it. You really do." I went back inside to make sure the breakfast spread was ready. As I poured myself some coffee, I noticed Daniel arriving at the front door, holding a box. He wasn't supposed to see Claire before the ceremony, but he said it was just a delivery, a surprise for her later. I didn't think much of it then. He greeted me warmly, as always, with that charming smile that seemed to melt everyone's guard. "Good morning, Mrs. Foster," he said smoothly. "You look lovely today." I laughed it off, joking that I wasn't even dressed yet. He placed the box on the table and assured me everything was going to be perfect. Everything about him seemed perfect. He'd been nothing but kind since day one, attentive, responsible, good with Lily. Maybe a little too polished at times, but who was I to judge? After what Claire had gone through with her ex-husband Stephen, I was just relieved to see her with someone stable. I remember watching Daniel walk out the door that morning, sunlight glinting off his watch, and thinking how lucky my daughter was. I had no idea that same man would shatter our peace before the day was over. Back upstairs, the bridal suite was filled with laughter, hairspray, and the sound of soft music. Claire sat before the mirror, a mixture of excitement and nerves in her eyes. "Do you think he's really the one, Mom?" she asked quietly, as I helped zip up her gown. I squeezed her hand. "I think anyone who makes you smile like that is worth taking a chance on." She smiled back, her reflection glowing with hope. Lily came in carrying a small bouquet, her dress neatly pressed but her expression uncertain. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire turned and hugged her, tears brimming in both their eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so happy you're here." The morning moved quickly, guests began arriving. Music floated through the garden, and laughter echoed everywhere. Everything looked like a dream. I stood on the porch for a moment, watching Claire pose for photos, her happiness contagious. Yet, when my eyes wandered to Lily, I noticed her standing apart from the crowd, staring down at her phone, her brows furrowed in worry. I started to walk toward her, but one of the photographers called my name for a family picture. I told myself I'd talk to her later. It was just nerves. After all, weddings could be overwhelming for teenagers. I smiled again, letting the moment carry me away, believing everything was finally falling into place. But something about Lily's quiet, nervous glances told me this day wouldn't go as planned. As I watched Claire getting ready, memories of her first wedding flashed before my eyes and the scars it left behind. It's strange how joy can stir old memories, both beautiful and painful. As I watched Claire twirl in her gown, laughter echoing around the room, I couldn't help but think of another morning long ago, her first wedding day. She was just 23 then, wide-eyed, innocent, full of dreams about forever. Her first husband, Stephen, was her college sweetheart, the kind of man who charmed everyone he met. Back then, I thought he was perfect for her. He came from a good family, he was ambitious, and most importantly, he made her laugh. I remember telling my late husband, Frank, that we didn't have to worry about our little girl anymore. I was wrong. The trouble started less than a year after they married. It began with Stephen staying out late, missing dinners, and making excuses about work stress. Then the bills started coming: unpaid credit cards, strange withdrawals from their joint account. I tried not to pry, but mothers always know when something's wrong. One evening, Claire came to my house, her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen from crying. She confessed that Stephen had been gambling. He'd lost thousands of dollars, money they didn't even have. I remember sitting there in stunned silence, trying to process how quickly her dream marriage had started to crumble. For months, she tried to help him. She took on extra shifts at the hospital, paid his debts, even lied to me about where her money was going. But addiction is a cruel thief. It takes everything, even love. Stephen grew angry and desperate, lashing out whenever she questioned him. One night, he didn't come home at all. The next morning, Claire found a note on the kitchen counter, a promise to win it all back. That was the night she came back to me, holding baby Lily in her arms. She was trembling so hard I thought she might break. I remember wrapping my arms around her, whispering that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. Watching her sob, her wedding ring still on her finger, I swore I'd never let anyone hurt her again. It took years for her to recover from that betrayal. She threw herself into motherhood and her work. Every time someone tried to get close to her, she'd shut down. Love to her was a luxury she could no longer afford. When Lily was around 8, Claire finally started to smile again. She got a promotion, bought her own little house, and started volunteering at the community center. That's where she met Daniel. He had been donating to one of the charity drives, helping organize events. At first, she was cautious, almost cold. I remember watching him patiently earn her trust, little gestures like helping her carry boxes, remembering her favorite coffee, asking about Lily's school. Slowly, she began to open up again. I wanted to be happy for her, but a mother's heart never forgets. There was always that small, anxious part of me whispering, "Be careful, not again." Over the next few years, Daniel became part of our lives. He'd show up for family dinners, bring thoughtful gifts, and help around the house. Even Lily warmed up to him. He wasn't flashy like Stephen. He was calm, polite, stable, or so he seemed. Everyone called him a good man, the kind of second chance Claire deserved. I told myself to stop doubting him, to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. After all, people change, right? Maybe we'd just been unlucky before. Still, there were moments that made me uneasy, times when I caught Daniel looking through Claire's papers a little too intently, or when he'd change the subject whenever his past came up. I asked him once about his family, and he said they moved around a lot. Something about that answer didn't sit right, but Claire brushed it off. "Mom, he's private," she'd said. "Not everyone likes to talk about their past." I tried to believe her. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the porch, listening to the crickets, and found Daniel sitting there alone with a drink in his hand. He smiled when he saw me, polite as always, but there was something tired in his eyes. "Just nerves," he said, chuckling. "Tomorrow's a big day." I nodded, though my instincts told me there was more behind that look, something he wasn't saying. I wanted to ask, but it wasn't my place. Claire loved him, and that was enough for me. So when I saw her that morning, radiant in her gown, I forced the doubts away. I told myself I was just being overprotective. She looked so happy, and for the first time in years, I saw the spark in her eyes again. That spark she'd lost after Stephen left. That spark I thought I'd never see return. Still, as I adjusted her veil and watched her gaze lovingly at her reflection, I felt a faint chill run down my spine. Maybe it was just the memories. Maybe it was Mother's intuition. But a quiet voice inside me whispered that love, especially the kind that comes wrapped in perfection, often hides the deepest cracks. I looked over at Lily, sitting quietly in the corner, scrolling through her phone, and noticed her expression troubled, distant. She was always observant, always sensing things before anyone else did. I made a mental note to check on her again before the ceremony. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's smile was hiding something deeper. By noon, the house was buzzing with excitement, laughter, champagne, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. By midday, the whole property had transformed into a fairy tale scene. The garden glistened under soft sunlight, the tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces bursting with blush roses and baby's breath. A gentle melody drifted through the speakers, one of Claire's favorite instrumentals, the kind she used to play while cooking dinner. Everything looked perfect, the kind of perfect that takes months of planning and a dozen lists to achieve. I stood near the archway, making sure every last ribbon was in place, when the first car pulled into the driveway, and then, another. Within minutes, our once quiet yard was filled with laughter, greetings, and the sound of old friends reuniting. Claire's co-workers from the school arrived first, carrying gifts wrapped in silver paper. Then came Daniel's side of the family, polite, neatly dressed, smiling in that careful, measured way that made me feel like every word they spoke had been rehearsed. His mother, a petite woman, with perfectly set curls, complimented the decorations but hardly smiled with her eyes. "It's lovely," she said, glancing around like she was inspecting a museum exhibit. I thanked her, trying to be warm, but she didn't linger long. There was something distant about them, like they were present in body but not in spirit. I brushed it off. Families are complicated, I told myself. Maybe they were just formal people. Inside, Claire was getting her makeup done. The hairdresser fussed with her veil while her bridesmaids fluttered around, checking every detail. She looked stunning. "Mom, it's really happening," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "After everything, it's finally happening." I walked over and squeezed her hand. "You've earned this, sweetheart. Every bit of it." A few minutes later, I went to check on Lily. I found her standing near the punch table outside, holding her bouquet awkwardly, eyes scanning the crowd. She wasn't talking to anyone, just observing, her expression unreadable. "You all right, darling?" I asked gently. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Just a little tired," she murmured. I reached out to adjust the ribbon on her dress. "You did such a good job helping me with the decorations. Your mom's going to be so proud of you today." She gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. As guests continued to arrive, I floated from group to group, greeting relatives, answering last-minute questions, and making sure the caterers had everything under control. The scent of roses and freshly baked bread filled the air. The string quartet started tuning their instruments under the oak tree, their notes mingling with the laughter of children playing by the fountain. Everything looked and sounded beautiful. It should have been perfect. Then, as I was helping a guest find their seat, I caught sight of Lily again. She was standing off to the side, just beyond the archway, holding her phone close to her chest. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight together. I thought she might be overwhelmed. Big events can be hard for teenagers. I made a mental note to have her sit near me during the ceremony. But as I took a step toward her, she turned away abruptly, disappearing behind the rows of white chairs. A few minutes later, I saw Daniel mingling with guests. He was charming, as always, laughing easily, shaking hands, making everyone feel welcome. He carried himself like a man who had everything under control. I watched him talk to the officiant, his hand resting casually in his pocket, his polished shoes gleaming under the sunlight. He looked like the picture of confidence. And yet, when his eyes met mine for a brief second, I felt a strange flicker of something. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just my imagination, but that tiny glance unsettled me. The ceremony was only half an hour away when I realized I hadn't seen Lily in nearly 15 minutes. My pulse quickened. I excused myself from a conversation and went to look for her. I found her just outside the dressing room, standing stiffly beside a table where the bridesmaids' purses and phones were kept. "Lily?" I said softly. She startled, turning to me with wide eyes. "Grandma, I was just..." Her voice trailed off. She slipped her phone into her clutch quickly, too quickly. Something was off. I opened my mouth to ask what she was doing, but before I could, one of the bridesmaids called for me. They needed help pinning Claire's veil. I gave Lily a quick hug and whispered, "Stay close, okay?" She nodded, but her body was tense, her gaze unfocused. I should have stayed. I should have pressed harder. But instead, I went back to the bridal suite, convincing myself that I was imagining things. When I returned to the garden a few minutes later, the officiant was preparing the ceremony table. Guests were taking their seats, fans fluttering in the warm afternoon air. Claire's favorite song began to play softly in the background. Everything was falling into place again. Or so it seemed. Then I spotted Lily rejoining the crowd. Her face was even paler than before, her eyes glassy, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her bouquet. "Are you all right?" I mouthed to her from across the aisle. She nodded quickly, forcing a weak smile. But when I turned to watch Daniel walk toward the altar, adjusting his tie and greeting the officiant with a calm handshake, I saw Lily look down at her phone again, and this time, her expression turned to pure horror. But when Lily disappears for a few minutes and returns pale as snow, I know something's terribly wrong. I found Lily sitting by the dressing room, trembling, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I'll never forget that moment. The garden was alive with music and chatter, but as soon as I saw Lily's face, everything around me seemed to blur into silence. Her skin was pale, her shoulders stiff, and her eyes were wide with fear, the kind of fear a child shouldn't know at her age. I walked toward her slowly, trying not to startle her, though my own heart was pounding. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked softly, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer at first. Her small fingers tightened around her phone like it was something precious or dangerous. "Talk to me, Lily," I whispered. "You're scaring me." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Grandma," I heard. "Something." I frowned, confused. "Heard what?" Her eyes darted toward the hallway, then back to me. "I don't think Mom should marry him," she said, almost in a whisper, like she was afraid someone might hear. My breath caught. "Daniel?" I asked. She nodded, biting her lip so hard it nearly drew blood. "What do you mean, sweetheart? What did you hear?" She hesitated again, then whispered, "Not now. Please. Just, not now." I could feel my pulse quicken. There was a kind of panic in her voice that couldn't be faked. I wanted to press her for answers, but at that exact moment, I heard a man's voice, smooth, familiar, coming from just around the corner. "Daniel." I turned slightly and caught sight of him standing a few feet away, half hidden behind a floral arrangement, talking on his phone. He didn't notice us. His tone was low, serious. "I told you after the ceremony, don't call me again until it's done." Then a pause. "Yes. I know what's at stake." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't hear the other person on the line, but Daniel's voice was enough to make my stomach twist. He ended the call abruptly, adjusted his cufflinks, and glanced around. That's when he saw me. His expression changed instantly, the tense, calculating look melted into his usual polite charm. "Oh, Mrs. Foster," he said with a smile. "Didn't see you there. Everything okay?" I straightened up, trying to sound casual even though my heart was racing. Yes, of course. Just making sure Lily's all right. He looked at Lily, who immediately turned her face away. Big day for your mom, huh? He said gently, his voice almost too smooth. Lily didn't answer. I stepped closer to her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Daniel chuckled softly, like he was trying to break an awkward silence. Teenagers, he said with a grin. Never easy to tell what they're thinking. He gave me a polite nod and started to walk off, but for a brief second, his expression faltered. There was something cold behind his eyes, a flash of irritation, maybe even fear. Then it was gone. He disappeared down the hallway, humming lightly, as if nothing had happened. As soon as he was out of earshot, I turned back to Lily. Honey, what's going on? You can tell me. She shook her head again, whispering, I shouldn't have looked. He'll know. My chest tightened. Looked at what? Her lips trembled. His phone. I saw something. I didn't mean to, Grandma. I swear I didn't. My breath hitched. What did you see? She looked down at the floor, tears brimming in her eyes. He's not who he says he is. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I sat there, my mind racing. Daniel, the man who'd brought laughter back into our home, who'd made my daughter believe in love again, wasn't who he said he was. It didn't make sense. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself Lily must have misunderstood something, but the fear in her eyes was real. She wasn't being dramatic, she was terrified. Lily, listen to me, I said gently, taking her hands in mine. You need to tell me exactly what you saw. But before she could respond, the bridesmaid burst through the door, flustered and out of breath. Mrs. Foster. We're ready for you, they need you at the arch. I glanced at Lily, torn between duty and instinct. The ceremony was about to start. Claire was waiting. And yet, a pit had formed in my stomach that wouldn't let me breathe right. I looked back at Lily. Promise me we'll talk right after the ceremony, I whispered. Don't say a word to anyone yet, okay? She nodded reluctantly, wiping her tears. Okay, Grandma. I forced a smile and hugged her tight, though something deep inside me screamed not to leave her alone. As I walked toward the garden, I glanced over my shoulder. Lily was still sitting there, phone clutched tightly in her lap, staring blankly at the floor. That image burned into my mind, my granddaughter, fragile and frightened, holding a truth she didn't know how to handle. I tried to shake off the dread. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe she'd misheard something. I kept telling myself that as I stepped into the sunlight, where laughter and music filled the air again. Daniel was already at the altar, greeting guests with that practiced grin of his. He looked calm, collected, like a man with nothing to hide. I took my seat in the front row, smiling at Claire as she prepared to walk down the aisle. But I couldn't stop thinking about Lily's trembling hands and Daniel's cold glance. My gut told me something terrible was brewing beneath the surface of all this beauty. As Daniel walks away, Lily whispers to me, He's not who he says he is. The violin started playing, and I tried to push the unease from my mind. The music began softly, gentle violins weaving through the sound of the breeze, rustling the rose petals scattered along the aisle. Guests settled into their seats, fanning themselves in the afternoon warmth. From my chair in the front row, everything looked picture perfect. The archway glistened with fairy lights, and the sunlight filtering through the trees cast golden streaks across the white chairs. It was the kind of wedding people dream about, beautiful, serene, full of love. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Daniel stood at the altar, his hands folded neatly in front of him, wearing that polished smile that always seemed a little too rehearsed. He looked every bit the charming groom, his black suit crisp, his tie straight, his expression soft and adoring as he waited for Claire. Yet the memory of his hushed phone call lingered in my mind like a dark echo. Don't call me again until it's done. I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was a business call. Maybe it was nothing. But the way Lily's hands had trembled, that wasn't nothing. I glanced to my right where Lily sat, her small bouquet resting in her lap. She was pale, her shoulders tense, her eyes fixed on Daniel with a mixture of fear and anger far too heavy for a 14-year-old. I reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. She didn't look at me, but I felt her fingers tighten around mine, cold and shaking. I whispered, "Just breathe, sweetheart." She nodded slightly but didn't take her eyes off him. The officiant took his place and asked everyone to rise. The doors to the garden swung open, and the bridal march began. My breath caught when I saw Claire step out, radiant in her lace gown, her smile wide and trembling all at once. She was breathtaking. Every guest turned to admire her, some even wiping away tears. I couldn't stop smiling. My little girl, after everything she'd been through, was finally walking toward a new beginning. I felt tears sting my eyes. For a moment, the world felt right again. She walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes locked on Daniel. He smiled back, his expression tender. They looked like a couple straight out of a movie. The kind that makes you believe in happy endings again. When she reached the altar, Daniel took her hands gently, his thumb brushing her knuckles as if promising her safety and devotion. The officiant began to speak, his voice warm and steady. He talked about love, trust, and new beginnings. About how true love means seeing someone's flaws and choosing them anyway. The words should have felt comforting, but to me, they sounded hollow. My mind was still with Lily's trembling voice. "He's not who he says he is." I glanced at her again. She was sitting perfectly still, lips pressed together, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. I leaned slightly closer. "Honey, are you sure you're okay?" I whispered. She gave a tiny shake of her head, but didn't speak. I followed her gaze and saw Daniel's hand tighten slightly on Claire's. His jaw flexed. His smile faltered for half a second. Just long enough for me to see the tension beneath the surface. My stomach twisted. The officiant asked Daniel to recite his vows. His voice was smooth, practiced, too perfect. "Claire," he said, smiling, "you've brought light into my life. You've shown me what it means to be truly loved and accepted." His words were beautiful, maybe too beautiful. People sighed, some even dabbed at their eyes. I felt my heart ache, wanting so desperately for it all to be real. Then he slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. When it was Claire's turn, her voice wavered slightly. "Daniel, you've taught me that love doesn't have to hurt. That sometimes, after all the pain, we can still find something good." She smiled through her tears, her sincerity radiant. "You've shown me that trust can heal." Those words, "trust can heal," cut through me like a blade, because trust was exactly what I was starting to lose. My grip on Lily's hand tightened as the officiant turned toward her mother again. He smiled, ready to ask the final question that would seal everything. "Do you, Claire Marie Foster, take Daniel James Turner to be your lawfully wedded husband?" And that's when I heard the sharp sound of something dropping. Lily's bouquet fell from her hands, scattering petals across the aisle. Everyone turned as she suddenly stood up, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears. Her voice broke through the silence, high and trembling. "Stop the wedding!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire froze, turning toward her daughter in disbelief. "Lily?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The officiant stepped back, startled. Daniel's expression changed instantly. His perfect smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic before he tried to recover it. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" he asked, his tone strained but still polite. Lily shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "You can't marry him, Mom. You can't." A stunned murmur spread among the guests. Claire's eyes darted between Daniel and her daughter, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "Lily, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. I stood up, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Lily, wait," I said softly, stepping toward her. But she was already backing away, shaking her head. "He's lying!" she cried. "He's not who he says he is." Daniel's calm mask began to crack. He turned toward the crowd, trying to laugh it off. "She's just overwhelmed," he said, forcing a chuckle. Weddings can be a lot for kids, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him, and everyone saw it. Claire's bouquet slipped from her hand, falling to the ground beside her. The entire garden went still, the violins cutting off mid-note. Every pair of eyes was on Lily, on my terrified granddaughter who had just shattered the illusion of perfection in a single breath. And just as Claire is about to say, "I do," Lily suddenly runs down the aisle, screaming, "Stop the wedding." The entire garden went silent, forks, laughter, and music froze midair. It felt as though time had stopped, the violins fell quiet, and even the breeze seemed to still. All I could hear was the heavy thudding of my heart and Lily's choked sobs echoing across the garden. Claire stood frozen at the altar, her veil trembling slightly in the wind, her face pale and confused. Daniel's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as his mask of charm began to slip. The guests exchanged bewildered glances, some leaning forward in their seats, others whispering under their breath. No one dared to move. I rushed forward, calling Lily's name, but she turned and ran down the aisle, her dress swishing behind her as she pushed past the startled guests. "Lily!" Claire cried, taking a step after her. But Daniel caught her arm gently, pretending to steady her. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, too softly. "She's just nervous." His voice trembled at the edges. I saw it. I saw the flicker of fear behind his composed expression. The officiant looked between them awkwardly, unsure whether to continue or stop. Claire looked at me helplessly, her lips trembling. "Mom, what's happening?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I needed to get to my granddaughter. I hurried down the aisle, ignoring the curious stares and hushed murmurs, my heart pounding louder with every step. I found Lily outside near the rose bushes, her back turned to the crowd. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Sweetheart," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "You have to tell me what's going on. Please." She turned to me, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling. "Grandma, I couldn't let her marry him," she whispered. "He's lying. I saw everything." I glanced back toward the garden, where guests were starting to rise from their seats, murmuring in confusion. Daniel was trying to calm Claire, his hands raised in mock concern, his tone dripping with false reassurance. "Let me talk to her," he insisted. But even from here, I could see the tension in his jaw, the panic in his eyes. Claire, still holding her bouquet, looked utterly lost. I turned back to Lily. "What did you see?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, then slowly handed me her phone. It was open on the table, his phone. "I just looked at the messages," she whispered. My stomach twisted as I took the phone from her trembling hands. "What kind of messages?" I asked carefully. She swallowed hard. "Between him and another woman. They were talking about Mom, about money, about what he'd get after the wedding." My fingers went numb around the phone. I didn't even open the screen yet. I just stared at Lily, her face pale, eyes red. "He said he'd handle the wedding and then they'd get the money." "Grandma, he doesn't love her. He's using her." The world tilted beneath me. I had to grab the edge of the bench to steady myself. My daughter's second chance at happiness, the man she'd trusted with her heart, was nothing but a fraud. I took a deep breath, my mind spinning, trying to decide what to do next. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, sweetheart. We'll handle this. But we need to be careful." Before I could say another word, I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel's voice sliced through the air. "Lily?" he called, his tone sharp now, no longer sweet or patient. I turned to see him striding toward us, his expression tight. The warmth was gone, all that charm had vanished. "There you are," he said with forced calm, his smile too tight. "Everyone's worried about you. Let's go back inside." Lily shrank behind me. "She's fine," I said firmly, rising to my feet. "The ceremony can wait." Daniel's eyes flicked to the phone in my hand, and for the first time, I saw real fear cross his face. "You shouldn't have taken that," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I held his gaze, my stomach twisting. "Taken what, Daniel?" I asked evenly. "Her phone?" He gave a tight smile. "Of course," he said quickly. That's what I meant. But his eyes told a different story. I stepped between him and Lily, my voice cold. You should go back inside. We'll be there soon. He hesitated, jaw clenched, then forced a shallow breath and nodded. Fine, he said. His voice clipped. But let's not make a scene. Okay? It's your daughter's big day. Then he turned on his heel and walked away, his calmness slipping with each step. As soon as he was gone, Lily handed me her phone again. Look, she whispered. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen and scrolled through the messages. My breath caught. Photos of Daniel with another woman. Messages that read, "Don't worry, after the ceremony we'll have access to her money." Another one said, "Once she signs everything, I'll disappear." I felt physically sick. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. My daughter, my sweet Claire, was about to marry a man who had planned to con her, to steal from her, to break her all over again. Rage, sorrow, and disbelief twisted inside me all at once. We have to stop this, I whispered. We can't let him trick her. Lily nodded, wiping her tears. I didn't mean to ruin everything, Grandma, she said, her voice breaking. I just couldn't let him hurt her. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. You didn't ruin anything, sweetheart. You saved her. I took a deep breath, standing tall, my resolve hardening. We're going to show her the truth, I said quietly. But before we could move, Daniel's voice called again, closer now, sharper, angrier. Darlene, he said, appearing at the end of the path, his smile gone completely. I think we need to talk. When she shows me the message on her phone, my whole world spins. On Lily's screen was a text message, and it changed everything. I stood frozen, staring down at the phone in my trembling hands. My pulse pounded in my ears, so loud I could barely hear the murmurs of the guests still gathered inside the garden. The words on that screen blurred for a moment, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. Photos. Messages. Voice notes. Proof. The truth was right there. And it made me sick. The first image showed Daniel with a woman I didn't recognize, dark hair, red lips, a tattoo on her wrist. They were standing close together, his hand resting on her hip. The timestamp said it, all just last week. The text below it read, "Don't worry, baby, I'll handle the wedding, then we'll get the money and disappear." I felt the air leave my lungs. The next message was worse. "She's signing over everything tomorrow. Once it's done, I'm out." The woman had replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "I knew you'd pull it off." I could barely stand. I grabbed the nearby railing, trying to steady myself. My daughter was about to marry a con artist. Not just a cheater, a predator. And my granddaughter had been the one brave enough to uncover it. "Grandma," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. He saw me looking at his phone. I didn't mean to. He left it on the table when he went outside, and it lit up with a message. I only wanted to lock it for him, but when I saw the name, She broke off, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. I saw everything. He was talking about Mom's inheritance, about taking it. My stomach turned to ice. Claire's inheritance, the money left by her late father, my husband. It was all she had after years of struggling. Daniel must have known about it. He'd planned this from the start. Every sweet gesture, every romantic moment, all a lie. I crouched beside Lily, holding her trembling shoulders. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," I whispered. "You saved your mother." But even as I said it, I knew we weren't safe yet. Daniel was nearby. He'd seen me take the phone, and he knew I knew. Footsteps approached, fast, sharp, heavy, angry. Daniel appeared again at the edge of the path, his face no longer the charming mask he wore for everyone else. His expression was tight, controlled, but his eyes burned with fury. "Darlene," he said calmly, too calmly, "why don't we go back inside? People are starting to talk." I straightened slowly, shielding Lily behind me. "We're not going anywhere," I said, my voice low. He tilted his head, forcing a smile. "Look, I understand this must be confusing. You've misunderstood something." He stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, sharp, expensive, suffocating. Why don't you give me the phone and I'll explain everything? I gripped the phone tighter. Explain what, Daniel? I asked coldly. The messages? The photos? Or the part where you were going to take my daughter's money and run? His expression faltered. Just for a second. Then he laughed a cold, humorless sound. You think I'd be that stupid? He asked, his voice dropping lower. Anyone could fake messages. You've seen how people are these days. You're being paranoid. Behind me, Lily whispered. He's lying. I could feel her shaking. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, and a dangerous look crossed his face. Lily, he said softly, his tone changing to something darker. You shouldn't go through other people's things. It's very rude. That was enough for me. I stepped forward, my voice sharp. Don't you dare talk to her. His smile vanished. For a brief moment, he looked like a stranger, someone I'd never met before. The warmth, the politeness, the careful charm gone. What was left was cold calculation. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed quietly, leaning in closer. You're going to ruin everything for her. Good, I said flatly. Because she deserves to know who she's really marrying. We were standing so close now that I could see the muscle twitch in his jaw. He wanted to grab the phone, I could feel it. But voices began drifting toward us from the garden guests calling Claire's name, wondering where the bride had gone. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, the tension in his face tightening. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath. Then, forcing a deep inhale, he straightened his tie and plastered on that same fake smile. Let's not make a scene, all right? He said in a louder, friendlier tone. Why don't we all go back? And you can tell Claire whatever you think you found? He turned and walked a few paces ahead, expecting us to follow. I looked down at Lily, her eyes full of tears but burning with courage. Come on, I said softly. We'll face this together. She nodded and wiped her cheeks. My heart ached for her. No child should ever have to carry a secret like that. When we stepped back into the garden, everyone turned to look. Conversations fell silent. Claire stood near the altar, her veil slightly askew, confusion etched across her face. Mom? Lily? What's going on? She asked, her voice shaking. Daniel turned smoothly toward the crowd, gesturing toward us like a man with nothing to hide. They're just a little emotional, he said, forcing a chuckle. Wedding nerves. I stepped forward. My hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Claire, I said quietly. You need to see this. The crowd murmured, heads turning. Claire frowned. Mom, what are you talking about? Daniel's voice cut through the tension like a knife. This isn't the time, Darlene. He was smiling again. But his eyes pleaded not with kindness, but with warning. I ignored him and handed the phone to my daughter. She hesitated, then took it. Her eyes scanned the screen once, twice, and then her face went pale. She scrolled again, slower this time, her mouth falling open in disbelief. Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. What is this? Daniel's facade finally cracked. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The guests began murmuring, some rising from their seats. Claire looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. Tell me this isn't real, she said softly. Daniel didn't answer. But before we can plan, Daniel storms outside, demanding to know what Lily saw. Daniel's polite mask was gone, replaced by pure rage. The moment Claire's trembling hands lowered the phone, the air in the garden turned heavy, suffocating. Guests stared in stunned silence, their eyes darting between her, Daniel, and me. The cheerful wedding scene, the flowers, the music, the laughter had crumbled into something dark and unfamiliar. Claire's lips parted, but her voice was just a whisper. You lied to me. Daniel's face drained of color. For a split second, he looked like he might speak, might beg or deny, but instead, his jaw clenched, and his expression hardened. Claire, it's not what you think, he said quickly, stepping toward her. Someone's trying to ruin this day. It's all fake. Fake? I repeated, my voice low, shaking with fury. Those pictures, those messages, they're right there, Daniel. He turned on me, eyes blazing. You've never liked me, he spat. You've been waiting for something like this to happen, haven't you? You and your granddaughter always suspicious, the crowd gasped. He had dropped the mask completely. His voice was no longer polished or careful, it was sharp, defensive, desperate. Claire stumbled back, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel, just tell me the truth, she pleaded. Please, tell me this isn't real. He laughed, not a real laugh, but a short, bitter sound that made my stomach twist. You think I'd throw my life away for a few dollars? You think I'm that stupid? He turned to the crowd, raising his voice as if performing for them. You all believe this nonsense? Screenshots? Photos that could have been doctored? You're all smarter than that. But the guests weren't buying it. Whispers rippled through the rows. People were recording now. Phones raised discreetly, their eyes wide. I stepped closer to Claire, standing between her and Daniel. Enough, I said coldly. You don't get to twist this. My granddaughter saw the messages. I heard you on the phone. Daniel's expression darkened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper only I could hear. You don't know who you're dealing with, Darlene. Stay out of this. I didn't flinch. No. You stay away from my family. That was when Lily, trembling but determined, stepped forward. You were talking to someone before the ceremony, she said, her voice cracking. I heard you say, I'll handle the wedding and then get the money. I heard you. Her small hands clenched at her sides. The crowd turned to her, a 14-year-old girl standing up to a grown man with nothing but truth in her voice. Daniel's eyes went wide, then narrow. You're a child, he snapped. You don't know what you heard. Claire's eyes darted between them, her voice shaking. Daniel, just tell me the truth. Please! He turned toward her, but the softness in his voice now felt hollow, rehearsed. Claire, I love you. This is all a setup. Someone's jealous, trying to destroy us. He reached out to touch her, but she stepped back, tears streaming down her face. Don't, she whispered. Just don't. I pulled Lily closer, my arm wrapped protectively around her. My heart pounded as Daniel's composure unraveled completely. His voice rose, the smoothness replaced with venom. You're all making a huge mistake, he shouted. You have no idea what's really going on. One of the guests, Claire's colleague Mr. Hanson, stood up. We saw the messages, he said calmly. It's over, Daniel. The crowd murmured in agreement, some whispering to Claire, others filming, as Daniel's eyes darted frantically around, searching for a way out. He yelled, his voice cracking. She means nothing to me, it was just... He stopped himself too late. The words hung in the air like poison. Claire gasped, covering her mouth. She means nothing to you? She repeated, her voice barely audible. Her whole body began to shake. Oh my God! Daniel took a step toward her, desperate now. No, Claire, that's not what I meant. Don't! I shouted, stepping in front of him. Don't you come any closer. He froze, breathing heavily, his face twisted with anger. You ruined everything, he hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? I protected my family, I said firmly. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. His eyes were dark and empty, like looking into a void. Then, without warning, he lunged forward not to hit, but to grab the phone. The guests gasped. I stumbled back, clutching it tighter. Give it to me, he shouted. You don't know what you're dealing with. Before I could react, Lily screamed. Stop, she cried, her voice shaking. Everyone in the garden turned toward her. Everyone, look! Look at the messages! She snatched the phone from my hand and held it up for all to see. He's lying. It's all here. Dozens of people surged forward, trying to catch a glimpse. Screenshots, photos, dates, proof. The whispers grew louder, turning into angry exclamations. Daniel's breathing quickened as the reality sank in. There was no escaping this. Claire's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the grass, sobbing uncontrollably. I rushed to her side, holding her as she cried. How could you? She kept repeating, her voice breaking. How could you do this to me? Daniel stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The calm, collected man who had charmed us for years was gone, replaced by someone raw, cornered, dangerous. His eyes darted toward the exit, toward the road beyond the garden. His breathing grew uneven. I could see it, the panic, the calculation, the need to run. "You think you've won?" he spat suddenly. "You have no idea what I've done for this." His outburst silenced the crowd again. He realized it too late that he'd just admitted everything. Phones were still recording. His fate was sealed. His lips trembled, his voice turning bitter. "You'll regret this," he whispered. Then he turned sharply and started walking fast toward the parking lot, shoving past guests who jumped out of his way. I held Claire tightly, her sobs shaking through me. Lily crouched beside us, tears streaming down her cheeks. Around us, people murmured, phones still pointed, some calling the police already. The fairy lights above flickered in the breeze, casting shadows over the wreckage of what had once been the happiest day of my daughter's life. When Lily shows the screenshots to everyone, Daniel's world begins to crumble. The man who pretended to love my daughter was nothing more than a con artist. The guests' shocked whispers filled the garden like a low, uneasy hum. Phones were still raised, cameras capturing every second as Daniel's world collapsed in front of him. I stood there, holding Claire in my arms, feeling her body tremble as the truth began to settle cold and sharp as broken glass. The man she had trusted, the man she thought she would build a life with, was nothing more than a calculated liar. My daughter's wedding had turned into a public unmasking. And yet, even with all the evidence flashing across Lily's phone, a small part of Claire still wanted to believe it wasn't true. That this wasn't happening. That the man who'd made her laugh, who'd held her hand through her darkest nights, wasn't a monster. "Daniel," she whispered weakly, her tear-streaked face lifting toward him. "Please, tell me they're lying." For a brief moment, something flickered across his face, not remorse, not love, but the recognition that his carefully crafted act was over. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. One of the guests, a man from Daniel's side, perhaps a distant cousin or friend, stepped forward cautiously. "Daniel?" he said, his voice low. "Is this true?" Daniel turned to him, his expression hardening into something cruel. "You believe them over me?" he snapped. "Over your own family?" The man looked uneasy, stepping back. Even his own relatives seemed unsure now. People began murmuring, their voices filled with disgust and disbelief. A woman in the front row shook her head and whispered, "I knew something about him felt off." Claire clutched my arm tighter. "Mom," she sobbed, "what is happening?" I brushed her hair gently away from her face, trying to steady my voice. "You're seeing who he really is, sweetheart." Daniel laughed suddenly, a hollow, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you're all so perfect?" He sneered, his voice rising. "You think I'm the only one who's ever made a mistake? You don't know what it's like to have nothing. To need something so bad you'll do anything to get it." His words spilled out faster, sharper, his composure slipping completely. "I loved you, Claire. Maybe I started for the money, but I loved you." His confession hung in the air like a stain that couldn't be wiped clean. Gasps rippled through the guests. Claire covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. You used me," she whispered. "Everything you said, every kiss, every word, it was all fake." Daniel's voice dropped, raw and unsteady. "Not all of it. You were supposed to fix things for me. You were supposed to make it right." Before anyone could respond, a man in the back, one of Claire's colleagues, raised his phone. "The police are on their way," he said. "I called them." Daniel's eyes snapped toward him, cold fury flashing in them. "You had no right," he barked. But he was unraveling fast, panic taking over. His hands trembled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You don't understand," he said again, more to himself now than to anyone else. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Claire wiped her tears and stood slowly, her wedding gown brushing against the grass. She looked at him not with love anymore, but with a kind of heartbreaking clarity. "You were my second chance," she said softly. After Stephen, I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again. And then you came along, pretending to be everything I needed. You made me believe again. Her voice cracked. And you destroyed it all. Daniel's lips trembled, his face twisted with something between rage and guilt. I didn't destroy it, you did, he shouted suddenly, pointing at her. You and your perfect life. You thought you could judge me, but you don't know what it's like to lose everything. I stepped forward, my voice sharp as a knife. You lost everything because of you, Daniel. Because you built your life on lies. His gaze snapped to me, filled with hatred. You think you're so righteous, he hissed. You think you can just expose me and walk away clean? You have no idea what I've done to get here. Then maybe you should start explaining, I said, steadying my voice. He stared at me for a moment and then something inside him broke. Fine, he said, his voice low and trembling. You want the truth? You want to know who I am? He laughed bitterly. My real name isn't Daniel Turner, it's David Marks, and I've been running from debt collectors for years. I needed a way out. Claire was supposed to be that way out. The crowd gasped audibly. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said, "He's a criminal." Claire's knees buckled again, and I caught her before she fell. Her sobs tore through me, raw and unfiltered. I let you meet my daughter, she cried. I let you into my family. Daniel's face twisted with something like regret. But it was too late. The sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. He looked around, panic flashing in his eyes. You don't understand, he said again, voice shaking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you after the wedding. I was going to fix everything. But his words meant nothing now. The truth had already poisoned everything. Guests began backing away as the blue lights of the police cars flickered through the trees. It's over, I said quietly. You need to leave. He looked at me, eyes hollow, mouth trembling. No, he said. No, it's not. Then, before anyone could stop him, he turned and bolted, pushing past the stunned crowd, sprinting toward the parking lot. People shouted, phones flew up again, and chaos erupted all over the garden. I held Claire close as she sobbed into my shoulder. He's gone, she cried. He's gone. I stroked her hair, my own tears burning hot. Let him run, I whispered. He can't hide from the truth anymore. But before they arrive, Daniel bolts toward the parking lot, trying to escape. I never imagined my daughter's wedding would turn into a manhunt. Chaos exploded across the garden the moment Daniel took off running. Guests shouted, some in shock, others in anger. Claire cried out his name, though I think part of her didn't even know why. Grief, disbelief, instinct. I grabbed her hand, holding her back. Don't, I said firmly. He's not worth chasing. But she was shaking so hard I could barely keep her steady. Mom, what if he gets away? She whispered. I looked at her, heartbroken. He won't, not this time. The sound of sirens was growing louder, their echo bouncing between the trees that lined our property. A few of the younger men from the crowd, groomsmen, neighbors, even one of Daniel's supposed friends, sprinted after him toward the parking lot. Lily clung to me, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Grandma, what's happening? She asked, her voice cracking. Is he going to hurt someone? I knelt, cupping her face. No, sweetheart. The police are almost here. Everything's going to be okay. I said the words, but my voice betrayed the doubt in my chest. From where we stood, I could see through the trees toward the gravel lot behind the house. Daniel's dark suit flashed between the branches as he stumbled, half running, half tripping in his desperation. One of the groomsmen shouted, "Stop him!" But Daniel didn't slow down. He reached his car, fumbling for his keys. His movements were frantic, jerky, like a cornered animal trying to find a way out. His car door flew open. A few guests tried to approach, shouting for him to stay put until the police arrived. He ignored them, slamming the door shut and gunning the engine. Tires screeched, gravel scattered, and a trail of dust rose behind him as he sped down the narrow road that curved out of the property. Claire gasped, clutching her chest. He's gone, she said weakly. He just left, but not for long. Just seconds later, we heard a loud, violent crash echo from the end of the lane. Gasps erupted through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Stay here," I told Claire and Lily. And before anyone could stop me, I started running. My shoes sank into the soft grass, my breath coming in short bursts. Several others followed, a few guests, a couple of Daniel's friends, all of us drawn by the same morbid instinct to see what had happened. When I reached the end of the road, my worst fears were confirmed. Daniel's sleek black car had skidded off the lane and into the wooden fence that bordered the property. The front end was crumpled, the hood smoking faintly. One of the tires had burst, leaving a dark trail across the dirt. Daniel was outside the vehicle, stumbling, disoriented but still trying to run. His suit was torn, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. He didn't look like the man who had smiled at us just an hour ago. He looked wild, desperate, unrecognizable. "Daniel, stop!" someone shouted. "The police are here." He ignored them, bolting toward the open field beyond the fence, but two officers were already running toward him from the opposite direction. The flashing red and blue lights painted the trees in color as the squad car pulled up behind me. The officers shouted commands, firm, professional, practiced. Daniel froze, his chest heaving, eyes darting left and right like he was trying to find one last escape route. But there wasn't one. When the police reached him, he didn't resist at first. He just stood there, his hands trembling, his gaze blank. Then, slowly, he raised his arms and let them cuff him. The weight of it all finally seemed to crush him. He muttered something I couldn't hear, his head hanging low as they led him back toward the car. The crowd had followed me by now, forming a loose circle around the officers. Phones were out again, recording. The fairy lights from the garden still glowed faintly in the background, casting a surreal light over the wreckage of what had once been a celebration. Claire arrived moments later, her gown dragging through the dirt, her face pale and tear-streaked. Is he okay?" she asked weakly. I turned to her, shaking my head. "He's fine," I said quietly, "but he's not the man you thought he was." She covered her face and sobbed, her shoulders shaking as Lily ran into her arms. "It's over, Mom," Lily whispered, crying too. "It's really over." One of the officers approached me. "Ma'am, we found this in his car," he said, holding up a folder filled with documents. "It looks like financial papers, forged signatures, account information, false IDs. My stomach twisted. "He was planning everything," I murmured. The officer nodded grimly. "He's been wanted in 2 other states. We've had reports of similar cons. This one just ended sooner than he expected." Claire let out a strangled sob. "He planned to steal from me," she whispered. "He would have taken everything." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "But he didn't," I said softly. "Because Lily stopped him. You stopped him by seeing the truth." Daniel was sitting in the back of the police car now, his hands cuffed, his face blank. He didn't look angry anymore, just hollow. He turned his head slightly toward us as the car door closed. Our eyes met for a brief second. And for the first time, I didn't see charm or deceit. I saw defeat. The officers drove off, the lights fading into the distance. The air felt heavy with everything that had just happened, the lies, the heartbreak, the ruin. Guests slowly began to leave, some offering quiet words of sympathy, others too stunned to speak at all. The decorations fluttered in the wind, the flowers still beautiful, but now they felt cruel, mocking. I turned to Claire, who was still clutching Lily tightly. "Let's go inside," I whispered. "We'll figure this out. One step at a time." She nodded weakly, her eyes empty. We walked back toward the house together, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees like the final breath of the day. And though the danger had passed, I knew deep down this was far from over. The lies Daniel left behind would haunt us long after the sirens faded. I hold her close, whispering, "It's over now, but the pain has only begun." The wedding decorations looked beautiful, but now they felt like a cruel joke. The following hours felt like a blur. The laughter, the music, the toasts that were supposed to fill the air, all of it had been replaced by silence. The guests had gone home, the police had taken Daniel away, and the garden, once glowing with joy, now looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. Rose petals were scattered across the grass, champagne glasses lay half-empty on the tables, and the arch where my daughter had nearly said "I do" stood crooked in the wind. The sun had started to dip low, staining the sky in orange and gray. Everything that had once symbolized love and new beginnings now felt heavy with grief. I walked through the mess in my heels, my steps slow, deliberate. Claire sat at one of the tables, still in her gown, staring blankly at nothing. Her makeup was smudged, her hair undone. Lily sat beside her, holding her hand. They didn't speak. They just sat in the stillness, both of them trying to make sense of what had happened. When I reached them, I knelt down beside Claire. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "you should change out of that dress." She blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream, and looked down at the white silk now dirt-stained at the hem. "I can't," she whispered. "It feels like if I take it off, I'll have to accept it's really over." Her voice cracked. That it wasn't real. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It was real to you, darling. That's what matters." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I was so stupid," she said, shaking her head. "How could I not see it? How could I let him in, Mom?" "You weren't stupid," I told her, brushing her hair back from her face. "You were hopeful. You wanted to believe in love again. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Lily squeezed her mother's hand tighter. "You're not the only one he fooled," she said quietly. "He fooled everyone." Claire turned to her, her lip trembling. "You saved me," she whispered, pulling her daughter into her arms. "You saved me, Lily." Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her voice muffled by tears. "I didn't want to ruin your wedding, Mom. I couldn't let him hurt you." I watched them hold each other, my own chest tight with emotion. For a moment, despite all the pain, I felt a glimmer of pride, not for what we had endured, but for what Lily had done. She had been brave when the rest of us were blind. Eventually, I helped Claire inside. We sat her down on the couch, wrapped her in a blanket, and made tea. The warmth filled the room, but the silence still clung to us like fog. Every tick of the clock sounded louder than it should. After a while, Claire spoke again, her voice distant. "Do you think he ever loved me? Even a little?" I hesitated. There are moments in a mother's life when telling the truth feels cruel, but lying feels worse. I sighed softly. "Maybe in his own broken way," I said. "But not the way you deserve to be loved." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I keep seeing his face when he said those words, 'I love you.' I thought he meant them." "You did what any of us would have done," I said gently. "You trusted someone who made you feel safe. That's not your fault." Lily sat beside her mother, her head resting on Claire's shoulder. "Can we just go somewhere else, Grandma?" she asked quietly. "I don't want to be here anymore." I looked around the room, the decorations, the leftover cake on the counter, the empty champagne flutes still catching the fading sunlight, and I understood completely. "Yes," I said. "We'll go. We'll stay at my house tonight." I helped Claire up and walked her to her room so she could change. As she slipped out of the gown, she stared at it for a long moment, then finally whispered, "It's funny. I thought this dress would be part of the happiest memory of my life. Now I just want to burn it." I didn't argue. Some things, I've learned, don't deserve to be kept. That night we packed a few bags and left the house behind. As I turned off the lights and locked the door, my eyes caught something near the coat rack, Daniel's suit jacket, still hanging where he'd left it earlier that morning. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But something told me to check the pockets first. Inside, I found an old envelope, creased and slightly torn. My name wasn't on it, but curiosity made me open it anyway. Inside were papers, some handwritten, some printed, and as I skimmed the first page, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a letter. It was legal paperwork. "Mom?" I helped her and Lily into the car, and we drove away from the house in silence. The night air was cool, the road quiet. Claire leaned her head against the window, eyes closed. Exhausted. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching her phone. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on my purse, feeling the weight of that envelope inside. I didn't know what it contained yet, but something told me it wasn't just another lie, it was the missing piece to all of this. Something Daniel hadn't wanted us to find. As we reached my driveway, the lights from my porch came into view, a soft beacon in the darkness. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. I'd open the envelope later, once they were asleep. Whatever it was, I needed to know. But when I find an old envelope in Daniel's dropped jacket, I realize the story isn't over. The envelope contained a will and a shocking name on it. That night, after settling Claire and Lily in the guest rooms, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the worn envelope I had pulled from Daniel's jacket. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. My hands trembled slightly as I unsealed it. Something deep in my gut told me this wasn't just another piece of evidence, this was the reason behind everything. Inside were several folded papers, some handwritten notes, others typed legal documents. The first page stopped me cold. It was a copy of my late husband Frank's will, the same will we'd filed years ago after his passing, but this one had changes, forged signatures, altered clauses, names that didn't belong. Someone had tampered with it. And at the bottom, I saw Daniel's handwriting, or rather, David's. My heart began to pound. I flipped through the papers, scanning the messy annotations and scribbles in the margins. There were notes referencing our family trust, bank account numbers, and most chilling of all, Claire's full name written repeatedly alongside the words, legal beneficiary transfer. It was clear. Daniel hadn't just been after Claire's affection. He had been trying to manipulate her into legally linking him to her inheritance. My fingers brushed over a photocopy of another document, a marriage certificate draft with blank spaces for names, and below it, a prenuptial agreement Daniel must have created himself. The signature lines were forged. My breath hitched. He had planned it all down to the smallest detail. On a smaller note attached to the papers, written hastily in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "Once the marriage is done, file the inheritance claim immediately. The trust will transfer within 48 hours. I sat back in my chair, stunned. All those months he'd spent pretending to care for her, every romantic gesture, every perfect word, it had all been a calculated performance to access the trust my husband had left for Claire and Lily. And if Lily hadn't discovered those messages, he might have succeeded. I ran my hands over my face, anger and disgust burning through me. "You vile man," I whispered to the empty room. "You would have stolen everything from my family." But then I saw something else tucked behind the legal documents was a small black and white photo. It showed Daniel, or rather David, standing with the same woman from the phone photos, the one Lily had seen. They were younger, maybe in their 20s, smiling at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "David and Hannah always partners." My chest tightened. Partners. Not just lovers, accomplices. She wasn't a fling, she was part of the scheme. My mind flashed back to earlier that morning, the strange woman I'd seen Daniel speaking with near the dressing room. The one who vanished the moment she noticed me. That must have been her. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police station that had handled the arrest. When the officer answered, I introduced myself and explained that I'd found new evidence. I could hear papers shuffling on the other end. "We're already looking into his background, ma'am," the officer said. "His real name is Kevin Marks. He's been using multiple aliases, Daniel Turner, David Marks, and a few others. There's a warrant out for him in 2 states for fraud and identity theft. Your daughter wasn't his first victim." I gripped the phone tighter. "And the woman? The one in the pictures?" "We're still identifying her," the officer replied. "But based on what you've described, she's likely his accomplice. They've scammed at least 3 women together. He handles the charm, she manages the paperwork. It's a professional con operation." My stomach dropped. 3 women. 3 lives destroyed. And my daughter had almost been the 4th. "Thank you," I said softly before hanging up. I sat there for a long moment, the papers spread out in front of me like fragments of a nightmare. Then I gathered them carefully into a folder and set them aside for the police. The next morning, Claire woke up looking exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying. I made her coffee and gently told her what I had discovered. She listened in stunned silence as I laid the documents out on the table. When I finished, she covered her mouth with both hands, her tears spilling silently. He forged Dad's will?" she whispered. I nodded. He was trying to connect himself to our family legally so he could claim the inheritance once you married him. Claire shook her head slowly, disbelief etched across her face. How could anyone be that cruel? "He didn't just want your money, Claire," I said softly. "He wanted control." We brought the papers to the police that afternoon. The detective we met looked grim as he scanned them. "You did the right thing coming in," he said. "This is enough to strengthen the case against him. But I'll warn you, it might take time to process everything. There are multiple states involved, and we're coordinating with federal authorities." Claire nodded numbly. Lily sat quietly beside her, clutching her mother's hand. I could see the weight of it all pressing down on both of them. "So, it's really over?" Claire asked finally. The detective sighed. "He's in custody for now. But his partner, the woman in the photos, is still at large." Those words made my blood run cold. I glanced at Claire and Lily, who both froze. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means she could try to contact you," the detective said. "They tend to cover for each other. If she does, call us immediately." We left the station in silence. The sky was gray again, threatening rain. Claire held my arm as we walked to the car, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she'll come after us?" I looked down the street, my stomach heavy with dread. "I think we need to be careful," I said quietly. We drove home, trying to put the pieces of our lives back together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. And then, one morning, we receive a letter from prison written by Daniel himself. I never expected him to write, but his words chilled me to the bone. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding that never was. Life had settled into a quiet, uneasy rhythm at my house. Claire stayed with me while she worked things out with the police and lawyers, and Lily was back in school, though she wasn't quite herself yet. She smiled less, spoke softly, and had started double-checking locks at night. I couldn't blame her. We all carried the echoes of that day, the shock, the betrayal, the fear that still lingered like a shadow we couldn't shake. One gray morning, as I was sorting through the mail at the kitchen table, I saw it, a plain white envelope, no return address, the handwriting oddly familiar. My heart dropped when I recognized the way the R curled at the top, Daniel's handwriting. Or rather, Kevin's. The letter was postmarked from the county prison. For a long time I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to tear it up without opening it. But another part, the one that still needed closure, still needed answers, wouldn't let me. I called Claire into the kitchen. She came in wearing her robe, a mug of coffee in hand. "What is it, Mom?" she asked. I held up the envelope. Her face drained of color. "Don't," she whispered. "Just throw it away." "I need to know what he has to say," I said quietly. "For your sake, for Lily's." She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I opened the envelope carefully, the paper trembling in my hands. The letter inside was handwritten, several pages long. The ink had smudged in places, as though written in haste. It began simply, "Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to try." The rest spilled out like a confession, each line twisting my stomach tighter. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I lied to you. I deceived you. At first I told myself it was just another job, another con to get me out of debt. You were supposed to be a mark, someone wealthy, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. I didn't expect you to be kind. I didn't expect you to care. And I definitely didn't expect to fall in love with you." Hands shook as I read those words aloud. Claire was frozen, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that not everything between us was fake. I was supposed to walk away after the wedding, but I couldn't. I wanted to stop lying, to tell you the truth. But by then, it was too late. I'd already done too much damage." He went on, talking about his childhood, a broken home, poverty, bad choices, debts that had followed him for years. It was a sob story. one he'd probably told a dozen times before to justify the pain he'd caused. But buried between his excuses was something that made my blood run cold. Hannah is still out there. She's smarter than me. She'll blame me for everything. But she's the one who planned it all. She knows where you live. Be careful. I stopped reading. The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Claire's eyes widened. He mentioned her? She whispered. The woman from the photos? I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening. He said she's still out there, and she knows where we live. Lily had just come downstairs, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Who's Hannah? She asked sleepily. I quickly folded the letter, hiding the last page from her. No one you need to worry about, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. Go eat your breakfast. When she left the room, Claire sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Mom, I can't do this again, she whispered. I can't live looking over my shoulder. I sat across from her, placing the letter on the table between us. You won't have to, I said softly. We'll make sure of it. That afternoon, we took the letter to the detective who'd been handling the case. He read it silently, his brow furrowing. He's telling the truth about her, he said finally. We've been looking for Hannah Price for months. She's been linked to at least 3 other fraud cases. We have reason to believe she's in the area. Do you think she'll come after Claire? I asked. He hesitated. We can't say for sure. But con artists like her don't go quietly. She may try to get what's left: money, documents, or revenge. A chill ran through me. So what do we do? We'll put a patrol near your neighborhood for a while, he said. Just stay alert. And if you see anything unusual, call us immediately. That night, none of us slept well. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual. Every car that passed outside made my heart race. I found myself checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. Claire moved into the guest room next to Lily's so she could keep her close. Days passed without incident, but the fear didn't fade. Then one evening, as I was watering the plants by the front window, I caught sight of something that froze me. In place, a car parked across the street. Engine running, lights off. A woman sat behind the wheel, her dark hair pulled back, her face half hidden by the shadows. She was staring directly at our house. My breath caught. The shape of her profile, the curve of her chin, the outline of her jaw was unmistakable. It was her, the woman from the photos. I turned off the lamp quickly, heart pounding, and called out for Claire. She came running, but when she looked out the window, the car was gone. Maybe it was nothing, she said shakily, though her voice betrayed her doubt. I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the empty street outside. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the beginning of something far worse. But none of us noticed the woman from the photos watching our house from across the street. It took months for life to feel normal again, but healing always starts quietly. The weeks that followed were slow, fragile, and full of adjustment. Every morning felt like a cautious step towards something new, not happiness, not yet, but survival. The memory of that wedding day still lingered in everything. In the half-packed boxes in Claire's room, in the soft hush of our home at night, in the way we all looked out the window just a little too long before drawing the curtains closed. But life, as it always does, began to move forward. Claire returned to work at the elementary school after taking a short leave. The first morning she left, dressed neatly, coffee in hand, I stood in the doorway watching her go. She looked different, older, not in age but in spirit. There was a new kind of strength in her posture, the quiet resilience that only comes after surviving something that should have broken you. I'll be fine, Mom, she said softly before getting into the car. And for the first time since that horrible day, I believed her. Lily changed too. The bubbly, talkative teenager had been replaced at least for a while by a quieter, more observant girl. But slowly, she began to return to herself. She joined a writing club at school and started working on a story inspired by what had happened, though she told everyone it was fiction. Sometimes I'd find her sitting at the dining table, scribbling in her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I asked what it was about, she'd smile faintly and say, "It's about a girl who saves her mom." It made me proud and sad all at once. The investigation continued for months. The police never did catch Hannah, though they believed she had fled the state. Daniel, or Kevin, as we learned to call him, eventually pled guilty to multiple charges of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. He received a long prison sentence. Claire was asked to testify during the trial, and though she was terrified, she stood tall in that courtroom. She spoke clearly, her voice steady even when recounting the details of their relationship. When she stepped down from the stand, the prosecutor told me quietly, "Your daughter's stronger than she thinks." Afterward, we decided to move. The house that had once been filled with laughter and hope now carried too many ghosts. We found a small place, a few towns over, modest but peaceful, with a garden in the back and a big maple tree that cast shade across the porch. The first night we slept there, I remember lying awake listening to the crickets outside and realizing for the first time in a long while that the silence didn't scare me anymore. It felt clean, new. Life began to stitch itself back together, piece by fragile piece. Claire threw herself into her teaching, finding comfort in her students' energy. She started smiling again, genuine smiles that reached her eyes. Lily spent her weekends baking or helping me in the garden, and sometimes we'd catch her humming as she worked. It was the kind of quiet peace that doesn't make headlines but means everything to those who fought for it. One sunny afternoon, a few months later, we sat together on the back porch. The sky was clear, the air warm. Claire sipped lemonade while Lily read aloud from her notebook a new piece she'd written. It was about 3 women, a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter who'd faced something terrible but refused to let it define them. Her words were beautiful, full of hope and courage. When she finished, Claire reached over and took her hand. "You're going to be an amazing writer someday," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily smiled shyly. "Because of you," she said. I looked at them both, my daughter and granddaughter, and felt something inside me loosen. The fear that had lived in my chest for so long began to fade. I realized that no matter what we'd lost, what we'd endured, we were still here, still standing. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in gold, I made dinner while Claire set the table, and Lily picked flowers from the garden for a small vase. It was an ordinary night, the kind of night we once took for granted, but to me, it felt like a miracle. As we ate, Claire looked at me across the table. "You know," she said softly, "I don't think I'll ever trust someone that way again." I reached across and took her hand. "You don't have to, sweetheart," I said gently. "Love doesn't always mean giving someone your heart. Sometimes it just means learning to live without fear again." She nodded, her eyes shimmering. "You're right." Later, as the dishes clinked softly in the sink and the house grew quiet, I stepped outside onto the porch. The moon was rising above the trees, soft and full. The air smelled like rain and fresh grass. Claire joined me, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. Lily followed, curling up in the swing beside us. We didn't speak. We just watched the sky together, the 3 of us survivors of a story that could have ended so differently. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind that can be shattered by a sound or a memory, but the real kind, the kind that grows from pain and patience. Claire sighed quietly. "We survived, Mom," she said. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Yes, we did," I whispered. "And we'll keep surviving." And as I hold their hands, I know the past can never hurt us again, because truth always wins in the end.